On June 22, 1941, the armed forces of Germany and its allies launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. Stretching from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south, three German army groups backed by roughly 3,000 tanks, 5,000 aircraft, and nearly 3 million troops swept across the border. Their objective was the complete conquest of Soviet territory to secure Lebensraum, or living space, for the Reich. The Red Army, caught off guard and rapidly collapsing under the weight of the assault, still managed to mount a fierce and determined resistance. It was during this desperate struggle that one of the Soviet Union's most iconic interwar tanks, the T-35, saw its only large-scale combat deployment during the counterattack at Verba.
But first, we've got an ad. You know that idea you've had sitting in your head for months? Maybe it's a website for your new project, a productivity tool to make your life easier, or even a simple video game you've always wanted to make. With Loveable, you can bring those ideas to life in minutes, no coding required. Loveable is Europe's fastest growing AI platform that lets anyone build full stack apps and websites just by chatting. You describe what you want, and Loveable builds the foundation for you. Then you can tweak everything visually, change colors, move elements around, or even dive into the code yourself if you want. And it's not just for mockups either. Loveable handles the back end too, so your projects are ready to go live. And if you're working with a team, you can even invite collaborators into your workspace to work on the same projects as you. Whether you're a solo creator, a startup founder, or just someone with a promising idea, Loveable gives you the power to build without limits. So check it out today. Head over to loveable.dev and use the code you see on screen for 20% off. Turn your next idea into reality faster than you thought possible. A huge thank you to Loveable for sponsoring this video, and now, back to the video.
Wehrmacht Army Group North was to capture the Baltic states and Leningrad. Army Group Center was driving for Moscow, and Army Group South was aimed at Kiev. Army Group South was also the first one to strike, capturing the frontier cities of Lvov and Zhytomyr. While Operation Barbarossa would eventually stall out just south of Moscow and Germans would be repulsed, the cost to the Red Army was immense. According to Soviet sources, the Red Army lost more than 800,000 soldiers killed, 1.2 million wounded or sick, and more than 2.3 million captured. Sources claim that, during 1941, the Soviets lost around 6.2 million small arms, 101,000 artillery guns, 10,600 aircraft, 325 ships, 20,500 tanks, 3,000 armored cars, and 159,000 other vehicles. While there is generally no consensus on these numbers, what is accepted is that the Soviet losses were massive and would have broken any other army of the time. These huge losses also led to the effective removal of certain older models of tanks from Red Army service, including the gargantuan T-35. Almost all were lost by the end of 1941, most due to drivetrain problems. However, some T-35s did fight back, counterattacking the Germans' Verba in northwestern Ukraine. But, in what seems to be a recurring situation for the Soviet armored forces during those desperate days, the failed assault consisted solely of tanks, without infantry, artillery, or air support. Of the 48 T-35s deployed in the 8th Mechanized Corps, all were lost by the 6th of July, just 15 days after the fighting started. Fortunately, the documentation from the 67th and 68th Tank Regiment survived, and provides valuable insight into the combat performance of the T-35. Apparently, all tanks from the 8th Mechanized Corps were lost in the withdrawal from their garrisons east of Lvov to Zhytomyr. Some T-35s were driven to Zhytomyr from Lubno, originally deployed from Lvov and Przemysl, being chased all the way by the Germans. Most T-35s were lost on this march rather than in combat due to mechanical issues. As the retreat wore on, the T-35s gradually broke down, with a few occasionally engaging enemy forces and managing to inflict casualties before being abandoned or destroyed. The only fully documented engagement involving T-35 in direct combat, where it was destroyed and later photographed, occurred on June 24, 1941, just 2 days after the invasion began. On that day, the German army exploited a gap between the Soviet 5th and 6th armies. This breach was quickly driven into by the 48th Motorized Corps, which included both the 11th and 16th Panzer Divisions, setting the stage for one of the T-35's final stands. The Red Army quickly recognized that the German army had found this gap and moved to counter the breakthrough. The Soviet 8th, 9th, 15th, and 19th Mechanized Corps were ordered to meet the Germans and engage. The bulk of the fighting that involved the T-35 was between Dubno, which was recaptured on 28th June by the 8th Mechanized Corps, and Brody, which was never liberated in the counterattack. It was between these two towns that a handful of T-35s engaged the enemy at the small village called Verba. According to both German records of the 16th Panzer Division and Soviet records from the 34th Tank Division, the engagement in Verba involved 4 T-35A heavy tanks, 2 BT-7s, 2 T-26s, and a single KV-1. These tanks launched an attack against the German flank, targeting positions held by elements of the 16th Panzer Division, which had occupied the village on June 27th. The attack was conducted without infantry support and did not have any goals beyond driving the enemy out of Verba. There was no Soviet artillery or air support. Germans, on the other hand, maintained access to Luftwaffe units which would prove crucial in the battle to come. It is reported that the Soviets managed to cut communications between the 16th Panzer Division and the 6th Army. However, all Soviet tanks were lost in the engagement. The village of Verba lies in western Ukraine, nestled between the towns of Dubno and Brody. To its northeast was the village of Pichia. To the southwest, Ranivka. All three villages were situated along a key route running northeast from Lvov to the city of Rivne. Verba sat just south of this road, positioned at a band where the route shifted from an eastward to a northeastward direction. While the road passed near the village, it didn't run directly through it. The village itself is located on the northern bank of the Ikva River, which featured a broad floodplain stretching about a kilometer to either side. Verba rested on elevated terrain, perched on the northern slope just above the river basin. At the time of the war, Verba was a typical Ukrainian village, quiet, honest, and home to an Orthodox church and perhaps no more than 20 houses. The Lvov-Kiev railway cut through the settlement, with a small station serving local traffic. North of Verba ran the main dirt road, accompanied by a narrower support track. A narrow drainage ditch, varying in depth, separated the two. The road remained straight as it approached Verba, but curved sharply to the north as it passed by. At this bend, the road descended about 10 meters down the slope of the Ikva floodplain. On one side, the ground fell away steeply towards the river. On the other, a small rise led up to the northern hillside. A small junction on this curve provided access to Verba from the east, marked by a series of evenly spaced roadside posts to warn of the drop-off. Beyond the bend, the road leveled out again, with a gentle slope down towards the river on the south side and another rise to the north. From that point, the road continued straight on toward Pichia. The village of Verba, once part of Polish territory, was captured from Poland in September 1939 and incorporated into Soviet Ukraine, where it remains today within the Lviv Oblast. On September 19th of that year, Polish cavalry units launched an attack on a Soviet force of BA-10 armored cars in Verba, losing around 50 men in the process. During the interwar years, Verba returned to its quiet, rural character until the outbreak of Operation Barbarossa on 22 June 1941. German forces captured Verba just 5 days later, on June 27. The exact details of how the village and surrounding road were seized remain unclear, but photographic evidence suggests a Soviet truck, likely a ZIS-5, was lost on the main road, while a Panzer II turret was found discarded in the drainage ditch between the two roads on the northern side. Verba saw additional combat on June 29th during a night attack, when Soviet infantry reportedly managed to engage and capture several Panzer III tanks belonging to the 16th Panzer Division. Some speculate that perhaps the Panzer III seen at Verba might have been previously involved in the fight during the night before the main Soviet counterattack. Beginning on June 26, 1941, the Soviet Red Army launched a massive counteroffensive against Panzergruppe 1. This engagement had become known as the Battle of Brody, or, as some historians refer to it, the Bloody Triangle. Some even argue that it, not the Battle of Kursk, deserves the title of the largest tank battle of the Second World War. The Battle of Brody lasted for 4 days, from 26 June to 30 June 1941, and involved 585 German tanks and 3,046 Soviet tanks. for a total of 3,631 tanks involved in this Titanic battle. When the fighting finally ended, all Soviet tanks and 408 German panzers had been destroyed. The counteroffensive came close to crippling Army Group South, but, by its conclusion, the path forward was clear for the Germans. There was no longer any organized Soviet resistance standing in their way. The Battle of Verba was likely the last engagement of the Soviet counterattack. After the previous 3 days of battle, Verba had elements of the 16th Panzer Division and the 48th Motorized Division positioned in and around the village. The Soviets were positioned at Pichia and were poised to make a last-ditch attempt to break out west. The assaulting force consisted of 4 T-35As, chassis number 148-30, 220-25, 988-16, and 0200-0. 2 BT-7 tanks, 2 T-26 tanks, and a single KV-1. By June 30th, the 4th day of the Soviet counterattack, both the Soviet and German units were exhausted from constant fighting. However, the Germans were certainly faring better, even though the odds were still numerically against them. On the night of June 29th, a German reconnaissance flight picked up over 100 Soviet tanks between Dubno and Pichia. Some of these tanks were noted to be heavy multi-turreted tanks. The bulk of this force moved east to clear German bridgeheads at Zaslav, southeast of Verba. However, a small group of vehicles drove southwest via 2 parallel roads to attack the Germans stationed in the town of Verba itself. Based on current analysis of the available photographic evidence, it is believed that the left-hand road was occupied by T-35A-200-0, T-35-220-25, the 2 T-26 light tanks, and the KV-1 heavy tank. Meanwhile, it is theorized that the right-hand support road was used by T-35-148-39, T-35-988-16, and the 2 BT-7s. T-35A-0200-0 was manufactured in 1938 and was equipped with an anti-aircraft machine gun and a P-40 mount. The tank had no clothesline antenna, and notable features included strengthened machine gun turret faces and the late version armored exhausts. All of the T-35s in the battle were from the 68th Tank Regiment. The regiment was ordered to paint 2 short white lines on the turret side to denote this regiment, and all T-35s in the battle were marked thus. We should probably note here that we recently did a video on the T-35 and its prototypes. If the Soviet land battleship interests you, check it out. There should be links in the upper right-hand corner about now, and in the description. The tank 220-25 was manufactured in 1936 and had early features such as only having 1 turret hatch. However, due to combat damage, the least is known about this tank. The chassis displays signs of heavy modification. Front idler wheels of the tank were replaced with stamped wheels without the usual holes of the cast spider-type wheels. The driver's hatch was replaced with the BT-type driver's hatch. The exhaust was also the later armored type. Originating from the first production batch of T-35s, T-35A-148-39 was an early tank that had been updated during the pre-war years. As it was from the first production batch, the clothesline antenna only had 6 arms to attach it to the turret. This had been totally removed pre-war, and only the 6 attachment points on the turret remained. The tank had been modernized with an internal exhaust system. The last T-35 at Verba, 988-16, was manufactured in 1938 and displayed a mixture of early and late features. The exhaust was the early exterior type, and the driver's vision hatch was also an early version. The tank also had the clothesline antenna intact. A single KV-1 was present, likely a part of the 34th Tank Division and probably the 67th Tank Regiment. However, this is not known for sure. It was likely part of this division as the vehicle was painted with white air identification triangles, which was common for the 8th Mechanized Corps, and specifically the 34th Tank Division. The KV in question was manufactured between April and May 1941 due to the technical features of the tank, including a bolted rear turret ball mount and the placement of the turret handrail between periscopes rather than behind the rearmost turret periscope. 2 BT-7 fast tanks were also present at the back. Each machine had a cylindrical turret, and both machines had the K-20 45mm gun rather than the Model 1934 gun. The exterior distinguishing features of the K-20 gun was the welded mantlet, whereas the Model 1934's mantlet was pressed into shape, giving it a rounded appearance. At least one BT-7 was painted with white air identification triangles on the turret side, placed over the serial number 434. A second BT was too badly burned to make out these turret markings. However, it likely had a similar scheme. Lastly, two T-26 tanks were deployed at Verba. Tanks both had a conical turret, and both machines were equipped with a 20mm upper hull armor that was angled. Both were also painted with white air identification triangles. However, at least one T-26 had this repainted green, and a simple line divisional marking was painted onto the turret side. This marking has been identified as that of the 67th Tank Regiment, which also fielded T-35s. However, these were not present at Verba, nor did any T-35 get painted with that specific marking. Little is known about the German side of the fighting at Verba, but what has been confirmed suggests the presence of at least two Panzer III tanks from the 16th Panzer Division, along with elements of the 48th Motorized Corps. An 88mm flak gun was deployed in a defensive position to the east of Verba, and support vehicles, likely also from the 16th Panzer Division, were present in the area. One of the Panzer IIIs identified was an Ausführung G variant, featuring the short-barreled 50mm KWK 38 L42 gun and external brackets for additional jerrycan storage. The second tank was a Panzer III Ausführung J, also equipped with the same short 50mm gun and similar jerrycan mounting. While these German tanks were photographed far less frequently than the imposing T-35s, one partial marking was captured. The Ausführung G displayed a turret marking starting with a 2, followed by two digits that are no longer legible. It should be noted that both Soviet tank columns attacked simultaneously and operated in close coordination. The separation between them was minimal, less than 3 meters, divided only by a shallow drainage ditch running between the two parallel roads. The left-hand column was composed of two T-35s, two T-26 light tanks, and a single KV-1 heavy tank. On June 30th, during the assault on the 16th Panzer Division, these vehicles advanced southwest along the left road of the Verba approach, placing the drainage ditch to their immediate right. Leading the left-hand group was the T-35 numbered O-200-0. As the spearhead, it came under intense fire from both the front and the flanks. It's believed that the tank was either immobilized by track damage or disabled following the death of its driver. It veered into the drainage ditch between the roads, with its right front idler wheel sinking into the soft ground, leaving the tank hopelessly stuck. The tank likely fought on in this position, as the rear turret was facing the Germans. The barrel of this 45mm gun was actually hit and almost shot through. The vehicle likely also engaged German infantry with its anti-aircraft Egchurov machine gun. No bodies of the crew have been found in photographs, but, given the circumstances, it is almost certain that casualties were sustained. A T-26 of the 34th Tank Division was lost next to O-200-0. It likely reversed into the wreck of O-200-0, judging by photographic evidence. The tank was originally hit on the road. However, it was swiftly pushed into the drainage ditch the first T-35 had fallen into. The T-26 displays no obvious damage other than a single hit to the front left-hand fender. It is likely that the tank reversed into O-200-0 after the destruction of the second T-25, which had been destroyed by air attack, and blew up in spectacular fashion. It is not difficult to imagine that the crew of the T-26 did not want to share the same fate, and so accidentally ran into the ditch while fleeing. T-35-220-25 was likely positioned behind O-200-0, but ahead of the lighter T-26s during the assault. It successfully advanced past the wreck of the first T-35, and it is believed to have been responsible for the few German tank casualties that day. As the Verba road began to climb and curve to the right, it intersected with another road running north to south. This is where disaster struck. At this intersection, T-35-220-25 was hit by a German Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber. The impact was catastrophic, tearing the massive vehicle in half. The force of the explosion threw the main turret from the hull, landing it directly on the road. The rear turrets remained attached to the shattered hull, while the front 45mm turret was blown forward, landing ahead of the tank. The hull itself was sheared in two just behind the front bogie. Nearby, a KV-1 from the same 34th Tank Division of the 8th Mechanized Corps was knocked out to the east of the first T-35. The KV-1 appears to have been in retreat when it was destroyed, as its hull faced eastward, away from the enemy, while the turret was turned rearward, likely attempting to return fire during the withdrawal. The tank shows signs of heavy damage, including multiple ricochet marks and penetrating hits to the turret sides and rear. The most striking evidence of its destruction is the shifted drivetrain, blown to the right, resulting in the loss of the drive wheel's hubcap and suggesting severe internal damage, likely due to a hit that dislodged the transmission. Initial photographs show the KV-1 still resting on the roadside where it fell. However, within an hour of the fighting ending, both the KV-1 and at least one T-26 appear to have been pushed into the drainage ditch between the roads. The last vehicle in the group, another T-26, made it the furthest east of all, finally being lost near T-35-988-16 from the right side group. However, not much is known about this tank, as the Germans preferred to photograph the T-35s. Speculation places two T-35s and two BT-7s on the right-hand support road. In this column, the T-35-148-39 was likely first after it drove on past the point where O-200-0 was lost. To the tank's left was the drainage ditch in which O-200-0 had fallen, and on the right was a steep hillside, with a wooded area and a building on top of this hill. Past this was a flat piece of land, level with the road. It is thought that when the tank reached the wreck of the first T-35, the Soviets were once again attacked by dive bombers. The tank turned to the right and had nearly completed exiting the road before being hit. 148-39 blew up in spectacular fashion. The tank was open like a can, with the main turret pedestal, and all the sub-turrets blown off of the tank. The main turret landed on the road, the forward 45mm turret landed on the hill to the right, the rear machine gun turret landed in the drainage ditch between the roads, and the rear 45mm gun turret landed back onto the destroyed hull of 148-39. Some of the bombs aimed at 148-39 missed, creating deep craters around the wreck. No crew survived. Between O-200-0 and 148-39, two BT-7 tanks were lost. The westernmost tank was burned out, whereas the second vehicle seems to lack any damage. It is possible that the first BT-7 was destroyed by enemy aircraft. However, given the lack of any visible damage beyond the scorching, this cannot be proved. As for the second BT-7, it is possible that it either suffered a mechanical breakdown, or that the crew panicked under German air attack and abandoned the vehicle in full working order. The last Soviet tank in the brigade, T-35-988-16, was likely situated in the right-hand lane. However, this is the most uncertain position, as the tank could also have crossed from one side of the road to the other. 988-16 successfully passed the wrecks of O-200-0, 148-39, and 220-25 before cresting the hill at Verba, with the village to the south of the tank. 988-16 passed the village itself and drove another 50 meters west. The tank took a hail of fire but was not stopped until it was fired upon by a well-hidden 88mm anti-aircraft gun. This ripped the face completely off the frontal machine gun turret and may have killed the driver. It also dismounted both guns in the main turret, in addition to damage to the sub-turret periscopes and the radio aerial that seems to have come from other sources. Apart from a single T-26, this T-35 was the high watermark for the Soviet counterattack at Verba. The Germans did not have things all their way, however. At least two Panzer IIIs of Ausführung J and Ausführung G were knocked out of action, along with at least 3 trucks. The Panzer III Ausführung J was on the left-hand side of the road and likely took hits from the tank's left side, as this was facing the Soviets. The tank seems to have gotten bogged down in the mud. The Panzer III Ausführung G was lost 25 meters in front of the second T-35 in the drainage ditch between the two roads. One penetrating hit from the 45mm gun can be found on the tank's left side, likely not the shot that disabled the tank, as another hit seems to have blown off the front right drive wheel, also taking off the track. The rear right idler wheel was also detached from the tank at some point. Like many early engagements during Operation Barbarossa, the Soviet counterattack at Verba ended in disaster. All Soviet vehicles committed to the assault were lost, with only modest German casualties in return. While German forces benefited from well-coordinated combined arms tactics and effective cooperation between branches, the Red Army, still reeling from the surprise invasion, continued to squander its perceived armored superiority in poorly organized counterattacks, often launched without proper air or infantry support. In the opening months of the campaign, the Red Army in the western USSR was effectively shattered. It would take years of rebuilding, restructuring, and experience before it could evolve into the well-oiled machine capable of pushing the war back into enemy territory. After the battle, the village of Verba was scattered with vehicles and, Throughout the duration of the war, the Germans slowly dismantled those that were left and moved them to the roadside. After the war, the Soviets completed the scrapping operation, thus removing all remaining physical evidence of the battle. During the post-war era, the main road from Brody to Dubno was redirected north of Verba and was renamed the E40 Highway. Verba itself has been greatly built up, with much of the new village extending north of the old major road. A gas station has now also been built roughly where the KV-1 was lost. The wartime main road is still in use today, and thanks to Google Earth, you can now virtually visit the battlefield. This concludes our video article on the Soviet counterattack at Verba. As with a lot of individual actions during the German invasion of the Soviet Union, specific details are unfortunately still pretty vague. That said, if you have questions or opinions on what we covered today, let us know in the comments below. As always, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on further content. If you'd like to support us further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. We want to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters, Dave Schuford, Sopwith21, Barrett Gentauer, Dan Fitzpatrick, Owen M., R. Robb, Leslie Holkauer, and Michael Herman. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations, and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.